Facebook Live. It's based on this week's blog, which goes out every Monday. We're going to talk about the brain and the gut connection. And I'm going to concentrate on the mental health aspect of this. I just wanted to preference this completely by saying, it might seem a little bit technical. I'm also not a medical doctor, so if you really feel something's off, you should always consult your main doctor if required. But I feel that from a mental health aspect, we need a little bit of information about our brain gut connection and how that comes to support our mental health. Again, the information I'm going to supply is only the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more I could have put into the blog. But what I'm giving you, you could find useful. I'm also going to give you some self-help tips throughout. So it's not too technical. I'm trying to steer away from the technical side of things, but it can feel at times, I think, just reading back over any of my notes, I just felt it was a little bit technical. So just a heads up, but I do try and intersperse some self-help too. So, the brain and the gut are very much connected, both physically and biochemically. They're in constant communication with one another. And this is very important. And it's really the key this afternoon about what I'm going to talk about, because that communication network between the gut and the brain is known as the gut-brain axis. It incorporates a hell of a lot of systems in your body: your brain, your spinal cord, your your autonomic nervous system. That's your sympathetic and the parasympathetic. I'm always harping on about the parasympathetic nervous system, and the ENS, and also the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Big word, HPA for short. I told you it was going to be a little bit technical. But they're all connected. And, an awful lot of the time, we think that it's our brain that's the primary, the primary one for our basic operating instructions for how the body works. And we might consider or think that the actual communication system that I'm going to talk about today is dominated by the brain. And, that's not true. In fact, it's actually the other way around. The gut plays a really big part in that communication system between what's going on up here and down here. It's the gut that's playing a bigger role than we ever thought before. And it's vital, that we get to know this. That's what's going on down here is really impacting what's going on up here. And really starting to recognize that connection in yourself. Now, you probably have already recognized it in some ways. Because what goes on in one certainly goes on in the other. So what goes on up here is certainly influenced by down here, and vice versa. And the human digestive system is much more complex than we first thought. We really only have to look at our own thinking, our own thoughts, to see how they can significantly impact our digestive system. So self-help tip number one, is to get you to recognize this connection between the brain and the gut. And I'm sure you're already noticed those connections. You're feeling nervous, and then you relate the butterflies in your tummy to that feeling of feeling nervous. Maybe you're going to recognize your anxiety. You're going to give a presentation, or you're sitting there waiting for an interview, and you recognize your thinking is all about nervous thinking. Oh, will I be good enough? Will I do well? What will people think of me? And then you recognize the anxiety starting to fill into your body and the butterflies that start in your tummy. You can also recognize, and I think the word that comes up is hangry. I think that's the one, is recognize that if you don't eat enough, how much more agitated you can feel, and how much more you're more likely to, snap at people as a result, just because you haven't eaten. So it's important, this is the first point, important to recognize that first connection in yourself, how your brain and how your body respond to one another, because we're holistic beings. We're not just, from here up. And an awful lot of the time, particularly with trauma, we can disassociate from here down. So, we need to recognize that actually, in fact, what's going on down here is really influencing what's going on up here too. And to reconnect that is very, very important. So some awareness questions you might like to ask yourself on this one is, what are other times that I can recognize something similar happening? Can I make the connection between, times I felt stressed, times I felt angry, upset, fearful, anxious, etc., and how I behave, how I'm feeling, how I'm thinking, what's the physical responses within my body. And that's important that we start to recognize those. Sometimes we'll actually recognize physical symptoms and physical responses before we actually recognize our thoughts and our feelings. And this is something we would use to help in therapy to get people to change behavioral patterns, to get them to change their thinking, to get in, to help them cope better with how they're feeling. So we get them to make that connection. Because when we start to recognize the connections, then we can start to change them. So as always, as I said, awareness is always, always the first step with something if you want to change it. The second point, sorry, I keep saying this morning, I don't know why, I'm still on this morning's work, I think, is, recognizing that the gut is now recognized as the second brain. Okay, so we have first brain, second brain. And, it's there, that recognition has been given for very good reason, because there's quite a number of nerves in the gut and they outnumber the spinal cord. And that's important. We do have neurons in the brain, and these, are thought to be as the hardware that run the show. But the gut also contains millions of neurons as well. And they are very much needed to run the body efficiently. So it's very much a two-way street here. You can think, I'm going to talk about the central nervous system in a moment, and in particular the vagus nerve. I'm going to talk about how that's like the superhighway. So you have to think about it. It's really, the whole thing is connected to one another and communicating constantly with one another. Remember the gut instinct, and I harp on about that too, listening to your gut instinct. And again, a lot of the times when there's something wrong, we don't trust our gut instinct, and that's the gut instinct that feeds up. It's operating anyway, and it's still operating even if you think, you've cut yourself off and you're only going up here, but it's still operating. And the neurons that I'm talking about here, these millions of neurons, are really connected through this nervous system to the brain. And they communicate, as I said, that gut instinct, that communicate up to the brain an awful lot of information. So one way they do it, as I said, is through this vagus nerve, and it's part of the central nervous system. And I've talked about this guy before, and he's a really, really very important nerve. It's connected to the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's an awful lot. Basically, what I've talked about before is the parasympathetic nervous system. It helps us step into the rest and digest phase. It tells you you're safe. And I've talked about this, about helping us, activating this to help us feel calmer and safer in our environment. We want to, particularly if you're stressed, if you're anxious, if you've activated the flight or fright or flight mode, then you want to calm down. And this is where the parasympathetic nervous system comes in. We want to activate it and bring ourselves down and calm down and feel safer in our environment. So that vagus nerve is sending, it's like a superhighway. It's the longest, one of the long, yeah, it is the longest actually, you know, nerve in the body. And it connects, you know, the brain all the way down, goes all the organs, all the major organs are connected into it. It has a huge amount of work to do, and it has a huge amount of influence on what goes on in both the body and the brain. So self-help tip number 2, I think, is you know, activating that vagus nerve. And how we do that is through meditation. This is why it's such a big deal, the mindfulness. Now, it can be any meditation. It can be yoga as long as it's relaxing, Tai Chi as long as you find it relaxing. Anything at all that you incorporates getting you to breathe. And breathe well. So deep breathing meditations are also important. 7-11 technique is, I've done podcasts on that. So there's actually a mindfulness 7-11 technique. There is 3-minute breather. They're all up on my podcast. They're download them for free. They're there. You can use them to learn how to do all these meditations. But how the meditation works is it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. And how it does that is by taking that longer out breath. So if you think about it, we do it automatically. When we feel safe, when the danger has passed, we automatically then just go, we take that, oh, thank God, we sigh, okay? We do that big sigh out. And that's what you're doing with these breathing techniques. That's what you're doing with the meditations. You're stimulating that longer out breath to bring you into that rest and digest, feel calmer, feel safer environment. So by doing the meditation. So this helps then decrease the blood pressure. So if you're ever feeling stressed, anxious, you feel your blood pressure going up, you know, pull over the car if you're in the car. I often found myself driving home from work and, you know, listening to the radio. I've had to turn it off on quite a number of occasions. Pull in and just take some deep breaths, longer out breaths. So we want to bring down the blood pressure. It'll dilate the pupils, it slows down the heart rate, and it also lowers the emotional arousal. It's why it's so popular as a mental health tool. It's why it has become so popular, because it stimulates this calmer, safer environment naturally within the body. So, you know, it can help with reducing your stress, your anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions. You know, it can help us think more clearly. Because when you practice it regularly, and as I said, it can help you with your emotional responses and be more proactive instead of reactive. One technique I recommend to my clients would be that they use the stop technique. So you stop what you're doing and you take a breath. And the whole idea there is to take the breath and practice this. Practice the breathing on a regular basis. It enables you to take the breath, relax, calm down. You take a mental step back as well at the same time when you do this. And then you can observe, well, what's really going on here? And then you can be more proactive when you respond. And therefore you're coming at it from a better angle for you than being reactive and being wound up by somebody. So it does give you a better behavioural responses. So that's the stop technique, and I've talked about this before. So that's a self-help technique that you can use, incorporating, you know, the breathing, the meditation, and trying to activate your vagus nerve there. So a little bit more technicality, I'm afraid. The role of neurotransmitters. You know, why do you need to know about that? Why do I need to know about, neurons that produce neurotransmitters? Because so much is produced in the gut. And these have been described as the software. So we've had the hardware and now we have the software that's, you know, runs the body. So examples of neurotransmitters would be serotonin and GABA. They're two you might have heard of, because I know you can get GABA, and people go looking for it. So neurotransmitters, yeah, produced in the brain, they'll help with the emotions and the feelings. So happiness, depression, anxiety, stress, fear. Also helps with the body clock, that main circadian rhythm. But remember, all the organs too have smaller body clocks as well. That those little circadian rhythms as well that are important, particularly for your sleep. So, self-help tip. Moving it on as quickly as I can. Many neurotransmitters are produced in the gut, as I said. Serotonin. 90% of serotonin is actually produced in your gut. That's vital. That's the happy hormone or the feel-good hormone. We're always encouraging people to increase this when we have issues around mental health. One way you can do this as a self-help technique is a simple walk every day. Get out, get walking, get moving. If you're feeling stressed, feeling anxious, feeling angry, I always tell people you have too much cortisol, too much adrenaline in your system. Get up, get moving. Get outside or start pacing. Use up that, but also you're going to start then, if you can get out for a walk, you're also going to increase your serotonin levels. Serotonin also helps regulate your digestive secretions. It's also vital for pain and nausea. Now, for somebody who, I don't know if people know this very well, but I have arthritis, it's genetic, and high levels of pain. You have high levels of pain with arthritis. It has a huge impact. I can tell you now for a fact it has a huge impact on your mental health. Anybody who's in pain constantly will tell you that. So increasing the serotonin levels is really important, not just for the physical, to help with the pain, physical pain, but also for your mental health, to cope with that pain. But as I said, serotonin is the feel-good hormone as well. So it is one that we will, as therapists, we jump on to try and get people to increase. Another little technical bit to go on is the gut microbes and our health. So, we've trillions of these are in our gut, and these help make chemicals that affect how your brain works. So the gut is producing these chemicals from the microbes, and they're affecting how your actual brain works. Yes, they do aid in your digestion. They keep the automatic nervous system functioning normally. They help regulate your mood, which is very important from a mental health point of view, and they also help your sleep cycle. Very, very important. If you're not getting, I've done a whole video on this. I've given you 11 tips before. There's a link in the blog, so check the description for the blog. 11 tips. There's a video, you can watch it, on how to improve your sleep cycle. And one of the ways I would tell you would be to, watch your caffeine, watch your sugar content, because gut imbalances can lead to an imbalance in your brain chemistry, but it can also affect your sleep cycle as well. So restoring good gut health could potentially also reduce depression and anxiety. So the studies are showing us this. So it's important, like, what am I eating? In terms of, if I know I'm prone to depression or depressive cycles, if I know I'm prone to anxiety, then what am I actually consuming is a vital question you should ask yourself. The other thing then would be, we know that from studies that large quantities of melatonin, which helps regulate the circadian rhythm, that, your main body clock, you need melatonin to sleep. It also is created in your gut, and it also helps regulate your gut as well. But it's a big one for sleep. Again, really, really important. The melatonin for your sleep. So serotonin as well, I've just said that, is produced in the gut. Vital again. I have to keep re-emphasizing that one. So, what are you consuming? Particularly around caffeine. Not to try and drink, caffeine related products after lunch. because it interrupts, we know it interrupts our sleep cycle. We want to look at perhaps taking a probiotic after you've had antibiotics. But again, you really need to be asking your doctor for best advice there before you make any changes to your diet. Perhaps also asking them to refer you on to a nutritionist or dietitian, or go and book an appointment with a nutritionist or dietitian if you're concerned about your how you're eating and your eating habits, and you want to make changes. If you want to make any big changes, you really should be consulting these people. But as we said, taking too much caffeine, too much sugar, again, same thing. Stress, anxiety, depression, all links into that, all linked in to the gut and how it affects those mental health issues. So this is something you've got control over. This is something that you can change quite easily, even without having to talk to your doctor, because they're going to say to you, cut back on the coffee or the caffeine products. They're going to say to you, cut back on the sugar. It's one thing that we as therapists, we would say to people, well, how's your diet? Are you out walking? How's your exercise? They're the usual suspects. And the reason we do that is we have to start thinking about ourselves as holistic. It's not just the physical health, and it's not just the mental health, and neither should be treated separately. They should be treated as one. Nourishing a strong, good gut means taking a holistic approach to our health and our well-being and our mental health. Taking steps to manage your stress, taking steps to manage exercise, eating healthy, all will help you. They're all self-help tips. Meditation, as I said, is another one. It's one of the reasons, I put eating and sleep and exercise and meditation on the basic self-care list, because they're looking after your basics. They're the usual suspects, as I said, when it comes to your mental health. Have a think about it. I know it's a bit technical this week. I've tried to incorporate some self-help there. Just have a think about what I've said. See, can you make even the smallest of changes can really help us sometimes in a huge way. I'll leave it there. I'll be back again next week as always. There's a new blog coming out on Monday. And thank you all for watching live, and those that watch on repeat here and on YouTube. Thank you very much for doing so, and I'll talk to you all again next week.